Hi, I'm Rachel Nelson, a director at Gatehouse Admissions, and I'm here today talking with Liza, Weale, our founder. The topic that we have at hand is recommendations. Obviously, a bit of a charged topic full of potential pitfalls. I'm curious, how do you think about recommendations, or how do you approach selecting the right recommenders?
Yeah, it's a good question and a huge stumbling block for people, right? One of the initial tools that we use is something we call selection matrix, and it really just prompts our clients to get on paper, who are they thinking about and why? And the why is essential because often they're thinking that they need to choose seniority. And I get it. They think if they have the senior most person vouching for them, that's going to get them in. Where I think we push, and certainly I do on those calls, is, okay, but what have you done for that person? How have you made that person's life better? And what have you taken off that person's plate? Why would they rave about you? Why would they want you on their next project? If they stumble to answer those questions, I know that we're going to be taking it in a different direction. What about you? Talk to me about, is that similar to you? What else do you look for?
Yeah, I think the key is depth of advocacy. It's somebody who has the knowledge of you and what you've done, and can kind of point to specifics, but also has the time and the willingness to write it. I mean, this is a big one. Sometimes clients will say, well, so-and-so is on maternity leave, or so-and-so is too busy. I'm going to write the recommendation myself. There's obviously an ethical issue around writing your own recommendation. Absolutely. But even bigger than that is the fact that you're never going to write as strong of a recommendation for yourself as somebody else will. And if your recommender cannot carve out the hour or 2 hours that it takes to write you a recommendation, in my view, you should find somebody else. It's just, we talk about how competitive these schools are, and it's like razor thin margins. And so, for clients to be running around trying to perfect all aspects of their application, and then to, in this one huge way, kind of almost leave it to chance with a recommender who isn't able to find the time to, help the client put their best foot forward. It just is kind of crazy to me.
Yeah.
For me, the big tips are, you really want an advocate. We talk about this also, sort of the level doesn't matter, the kind of arms race, the focus on seniority, it isn't always well placed, except for sometimes I do think somebody more senior can be useful if they've seen a breadth of projects. So perhaps maybe you've worked across a couple of different teams, and there's somebody more senior who can even pull in feedback from a couple of different people who are a little bit more junior. I'm curious to get your thoughts on the question around how you approach differently those schools that now have one recommendation. More and more common, obviously, we're seeing Wharton, Columbia, Sloan, all have one recommendation. But I think in the case of that, I sometimes think that actually having one senior person who can pull in feedback from other folks maybe becomes more valuable if that person's an advocate, if they can really speak directly to your work as well.
I guess I think about it a little bit differently, and I do want to come back to the idea of writing your own recommendation, which always fills me with so much angst. I place a lot of importance on recency. So I really look to their most current job and try to find someone in that job no matter what.
And a lot of schools make that, back to this question, or kind of the point around giving the schools what they ask for. A lot of schools specifically ask for it, right?
Yeah.
They'll say, Columbia is very blatant. We want, your current direct supervisor. So give them what they ask for.
Yeah, exactly. But I think your strategy, I think that makes sense. I also ultimately believe, just as you said, even if it's not the person who's overseeing lots of projects, that's going to make a lot of sense if someone's in private equity or management consulting. But if someone has one manager or whatever, it really comes down to, are they willing to spend the time? Because a lot of this process is, of course, our clients then prepping the recommender. And prepping, it's not writing it themselves, because my whole point on that is, it is actually incredibly hard to put yourself in the shoes of someone else and write from their perspective. And that's why they have letters of recommendations. And, I see it. I've seen letters that I'm like, you wrote this, your recommender didn't. Because it's too close, too much like someone who is not senior is actually writing this letter.
Well, and I would say also, it's often not as strong as the recommender would write themselves.
Yes.
It's really hard to talk about ourselves in, I don't say as glowing terms, but it's just almost never to the same degree of strength of advocacy as somebody else will write about you. It's impossible to find the words to talk about yourself in the same way that somebody who truly thinks that you walk on water will do.
Yeah. And I think sometimes clients feel stuck, and I appreciate that. So I think one of the ways, one of our roles is to help them convince their recommenders to actually write it. And so a lot of the coaching I give is really explain they're doing the client a favor by saying, just write your recommendation. I'll give it a little and send it in. You can write whatever you want. And the client's like, sweet. And I'm like, no, don't do it. And so, then it's educating the client on how to explain to the recommender that, they appreciate that willingness and that trust, but that's actually going to hurt the applicant. And then what I always say to the applicant is now, share a few stories of where you really hit the ball out of the park. Share, remind the recommender of those times when you went above and beyond. And if you do that, you will make it, ideally, sufficiently easy for the person to be like, oh, okay, this isn't going to be that hard. I can spend the 1 to 2 hours and write an effective letter on behalf of our clients. I get it. Our clients are dealing with people who are busy, who have demanding jobs, and our clients don't want to put out the recommenders. What do you do? What advice do you give when someone's like, I don't want to ask my current manager?
So it happens. I mean, I think, you've kind of alluded to, obviously it's ideal if you can get a current manager. And a lot of schools will ask for it. But I think, there's a couple of ways of thinking about it. So first is there somebody who might not be your current direct manager, but is a current maybe senior to your manager who you can ask. And so again, maybe they can pull in feedback from a couple different people or from your manager, but maybe there's more flexibility for them to write that recommendation. Sometimes it's just simply not possible to get somebody current. And so, it's a matter of going back, looking for an advocate, maybe in a previous role or in a previous company, and then explaining that rationale in the optional essay.
But do you ever think, because I think sometimes I do you ever think that that person is at a disadvantage if they can't get a current recommendation?
I hate to think so, but yes, I think they probably are. And that's why, I push clients a lot, because sometimes the client will say, well, my manager's not going to be happy when they find out that I'm going to business school. But ultimately, you are going to be going to business school. And I would say also kind of sometimes even reframing it for clients to say, like, listen, your company, your manager relies on pre-MBA talent. And the surest way for them to get more talent is by having you progress, whether that's at the company or whether that's outside. So actually having you get into a good business school is usually a great thing for that company, and it's a great thing for that manager. And so sometimes it's just a matter of like repositioning it for them to say, well, actually, the thing that you're most afraid of maybe isn't something to be afraid of at all. But yeah, I would say sometimes also it's not possible to get a current manager because the client has just started a new job recently, or the manager is on maternity leave. Could be any number of things. Maybe the manager has an ill parent. So it's most ideal to have somebody who is a current supervisor in some form. And I do think puts the client a little bit on the back foot. Again, with this optional essay, we've talked a lot about the optional essay. It's fine to use that optional essay, but in an ideal world, you're not using it because you're not kind of doing anything off the kind of standard path in that way. So yes, I do think it puts the client a little bit on the back foot. I don't know if you agree.
Yeah, I do. But it's tough because we recognize it happens and the schools do too. So I think you're right. It's like, okay, let's first explore, can we really not ask your current manager what's going on there? And I always say, like, look, it's not worth risking your job, but let's think through what that block is. It is a telltale sign if there is not a current advocate. And that is usually perhaps an indication that somebody should wait and maybe try to get a little bit more experience to have a stronger recommendation. Look, like there's no hard and fast rule. And very often we work with clients that don't have a current manager and they do just fine. They do stupendously through this process. But it does enter into the equation. It is something that you and we spend our time thinking about, our clients will spend their time thinking about, and we have to be strategic. So it's very much like one size does not fit all, but yeah, in an ideal world, you'd have it. And so if you don't, you have to make sure you're making up for it in some other aspect of your application, or potentially you're waiting a little bit. So as you can see, it's such a great area. And as one of our colleagues, Brooke, she always says, when you apply? It actually depends. There's no one right answer, but the answer is just going to depend on your situation. So if you're contemplating when makes the most sense, definitely reach out to Gatehouse. We can help you think through how much that next year is going to add or whether or not you've got a shot in going for it this year.